Welcome to this episode of the Founder's Mind Tangent. This is your host, Adam Muchler. On this tangent, we continue the conversation with John Zeratsky, author of Make Time. You're entering the conversation with John and I discussing how one size does not fit all when it comes to building habits. Take a listen. One of the things, just in listening to you talk about the differences, and when I look at the coaching work I do, is this difference between saying we or I or you, and in the context of teams or in the context of work. And when you start to say things about yourself or things that I have to do, it can be uncomfortable, and it can sort of implicate that there's a lot more work to do.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And that was something that Jake and I talked a lot about when we were working on Make Time. We knew that it couldn't be one size fits all, and we knew that it wasn't just like, if you do these 11 things, you'll succeed, because that's not realistic at all. And so we knew that it had to be presented in a way that was obviously directed enough that it would encourage people to adopt these ideas, but we felt that we couldn't be overly prescriptive about it. So we made sure to include a lot of our own stories and talk about places where we've tried to adjust how we're spending our time and where we've succeeded and where we've failed. And that, you mentioned that can sometimes be challenging, and that can reveal things. And even in the writing, I think it's easy to sit there and write, you should do this, you should do that. But we had this principle while we were writing that we wanted to make sure that we were sharing our stories, and even just doing that was at times uncomfortable and challenging. It wasn't the path of least resistance, to be vulnerable. And so, but we did it, and I think the book is better for it.
Yeah, I think that just honing in this vulnerability, this idea of vulnerability, is a big sort of, you're opening the door essentially into being more raw and into really digging into something more real, which I think is interesting. And I'm looking at, I have the book here and just going through some of the topics. There are a lot of anecdotes, but there's also, to your point, it's not one size fits all. And not to overwhelm listeners that may or may not read the book, but there are over 80 tactics in the book. Right. And I think what I'm getting is it's kind of like a buffet, and they're in categories, and there are things that you can do in zone, like, they're focused in, different topics. But I appreciate that as someone who looks at, when you say, if you were to say, here are the 80 things you need to do, that's going to crush people. But here are the 80, here are 80 things that you can pick from that you could do or can do. And here they're organized in sort of these zones of, this is, highlights, laser, energize, reflect, just to use the language from your book.
Yeah. Yeah. We kind of think of it like a cookbook. You pick up a cookbook, and there's probably some philosophy of that cookbook that you like. Maybe it's a vegetarian cookbook, or it's recipes that are really easy to make, or something like Whole30 that represents a very specific philosophy on food. But then you don't try to make all the recipes at once, and you don't have this expectation that you're gonna make all the recipes. And that's very much the same with Make Time. We want people to accept that this daily process of choosing a highlight, of being proactive about what you want to make time for, of avoiding distractions so that you can find that laser-like focus, of building energy, and then perhaps most importantly, reflecting at the end of the day on just how things are going for you. We want to convince people that that's worthwhile. That's sort of the core philosophy of the book. But then the tactics are the recipes. So, you can try a few things here and there. The ones that you like, you might come back to again and again. If it's not quite working for you, you kind of flip through the book. We encourage people that, they don't have to read it beginning to end. They can flip through, fold over a corner of a page, stick a sticky note in there, whatever they want to do. But look for something that's maybe feels like it's going to help them get closer to the things that they're they're trying to make time for. And actually, if somebody reads the book and they don't use any of the tactics, but they're still going through that process of choosing a highlight, beating distraction, building energy, reflecting, that's success in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started reading through things, and you had those 4 categories, I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. And there are illustrations to go along with it, which, by the way, I love the illustrations. I don't know what the final version will be, but then taking it deeper into these tactics, I was like, oh, damn, like there are a lot of layers here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of weird stuff. There's like we mentioned earlier, Time Dorks. That's our newsletter, and that's really how we think of ourselves. We're dorks about this stuff. We love to geek out on different ways of trying to make better use of our time. And so some of the tactics are pretty dorky and pretty challenging in that way. But a lot of them are really simple and approachable things that are, our goal was that they're things that you can try very easily. They don't require ongoing willpower or some crazy amount of self-control to make the perfect decision every day. But yeah, there are some weird ones in there.
I mean, just Time Dorks was, a newsletter that I imagine helped feed the fuel for this book a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, more than a little bit. I mean, it was very, Time Dorks was our way of bringing all the lessons we had been learning in the design sprints, and then just with ourselves on our own. Time Dorks was our way of bringing that to lots more people and testing out the ideas with lots more people. So we wanted to, with the articles we were writing and sending up to the newsletter, we wanted them to be positioned as experiments, things that we had tried, sharing our results, whether we succeeded or whether we failed, and went back to our old distracted ways. But we wanted to encourage people to try them. And one of the most fun things about this whole process has just been hearing stories from people writing in and talking about simple stuff, about how they removed a particular app from their phone and then were able to measure how much time they had reclaimed, all the way to really extreme stuff. There's a story that we got from one of the Time Dorks readers that's actually in the book. And this woman, she had a really serious addiction to Facebook, to the point where she could hardly get any work done at the office because she was just constantly, keeping up on Facebook, and it kind of fed into this, this FOMO, or sort of this sense that everybody else has a better life, or a more interesting or more glamorous life than you do. And she shared with us her story of actually getting off Facebook altogether, and just how challenging that was for her. But I never imagined that I would be in a spot where people were sharing those kinds of stories with me. So that has been really cool.
Well, there's this mantra or phrase, or I don't know what you want to call it, but basically in coaching, in the work that I'm doing, one of the things that I talk about with clients is awareness creates choice. Right? Yeah. And there are a lot of different ways to create awareness, and I might say something to someone and someone else might say the exact same thing, and it actually clicks for them.
Oh, is that because there's some threshold of awareness that's necessary?
It could be a threshold, but it could also be that they just hear it differently from someone else.
I see.
So having this book, Make Time, it's not that someone doesn't know what social media is doing to them or how it's distracting them, but being able to, just like the Twitter example for me, reading that little highlight for some reason, that was the click for me. I was like, this is obvious. I know that, but
right.
Am I doing anything about it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that is helpful. That's something that I've experienced so many times. Like just putting language around something can totally transform the way you're thinking about it. And I hope that then in the context of the book, I hope that people will turn the page or keep reading, and they'll go from that awareness into what's a particular solution that they can try? What's a concrete change that they can actually make, and then see how it goes, reflect on it, and see if that's a change that they want to make permanent in their life.
Yeah. There's actually an element of when I look at these different tactics and, again, upwards of 80, it makes me think of another book, One Small Step Can Change Your Life, the Kaizen Way. I don't know if you're familiar.
I mean, I'm loosely familiar with Kaizen, but I don't know that book.
So One Small Step Can Change Your Life kind of talks about these little practices or we'll use your language that you have here, tactics. And when I'm looking at what you've written here and sort of these different tactics, for me, it really connects with this idea of you can start with one of them or start with something small and practice it and see how it feels for you. And maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't. And then you can move on to another one or you can add another one, depending on what your experience is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's such a powerful philosophy. And that really mirrors my own experience. When I started out trying to make good use of my time, it wasn't this grand transformation that happened. It started as a few small little things. And then that space that I created allowed me to pursue new interests. For example, my wife and I started getting really into sailing. And about 5 years ago, we bought an old sailboat when we lived out in San Francisco. And we started to fix it up a little bit here and there and take bigger and bigger trips. And I had this sense that I wasn't sitting there and thinking, oh, I want to be able to, the dream that I have is to, make sailing a big part of my life. Yeah. But it was something that when I cracked the door open, I could just kind of keep pushing it a little bit more and a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And eventually we actually got to the point where my wife and I decided to leave our full-time jobs in San Francisco and move on to our sailboat. And we spent about 8 months sailing from San Francisco to Panama along the Pacific coast of North America. But it didn't start that way. It was just a little change. It was just a little thing. And it kind of grows and the changes compound. And, we felt like eventually we were in a spot where we had really made our life our own. But it was a slow climb to get there. And I think, I love your perspective on that, just starting with one change, can be the first step on a really interesting long journey. Yeah.
And this is the work that I immerse myself in. I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday where making those big changes they end up being an accumulation of very nuanced decisions. And I think about athletes a lot, like the difference between, 53% of your shots going in versus 50% is very nuanced.
Yeah.
But over the course of a season or a series has some pretty serious impacts.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's the same with, any kind of behavior. I'm thinking a lot about time and attention, but I'm also very interested in the decisions that people make about their money. And, the same idea of having to apply willpower to, not buy the latte or not buy the, whatever thing, personal finance gurus tell you not to buy, versus, making little structural changes like, when you get a raise, setting aside that money instead of spending it on a nicer place. And how, taken as a unit, that's a pretty small thing. But like you're saying with the basketball example, like over the course of a year and a decade, that stuff can add up and it can become transformative.
Yeah, it's pretty massive. I find it really fascinating. And I would never claim to be perfect or excellent at any of these things that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, neither would I. And that is, I think, I'm glad you brought that up. That's such an important message. And it's such an important part of this book that perfection is not the goal. It's not even a thing. There's no golden ideal for how we're supposed to spend our time. I think that the best we can hope for is that we all feel like we had time for the things that were important to us, that we were being proactive with our time, that we were in charge of how we spend our days rather than being dragged through the day by our calendars and our email and the demands that other people put on us. So yeah, I totally agree. Perfection is not the goal.
Yeah, that's an exhausting journey with almost no reward.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Founder's Mind Tangent. Check back next week to hear from Marav, co-founder and CEO of Data Society. Learn how Marav went from being a K-12 teacher to starting a data science education company. Listen and learn to some of the lessons Marav has worked through along the way and where she sees data science heading in the future. To make sure you don't miss any awesome wisdom from guests and stay up to date on the most recent episodes of the show, be sure to visit thefoundersmind.com. You can also follow along on social at The Founder's Mind. Last but not least, thank you to Roy Matz for the music on this show and his dope editing skills that make The Founder's Mind possible. Until next time, take care.
In the world, going through all of this insanity and try to bring new ideas, make them a reality. Illuminate in the thoughts, make it a priority to implement what you learn. What you get is what you be. In a world full of noise, hard to find that clarity to try to lead subtly, never full of vanity, and try to change something small or try to change humanity. Power forward through the dark, founder's mind is what you